My ex-wife forgot to turn off her webcam, and in that single accidental moment I watched her whisper the words that destroyed 14 months of lies. I'd told myself, why can't you see I've loved you all along? I'm Nathaniel Calloway, 38, an architect who designs flawless homes for strangers but couldn't hold together the one home that ever mattered. Serena was my wife, my best friend, the mother of my 2 children, the woman I loved more than my own breath. But we never officially ended things. We never signed a single paper. We just went quiet. We stopped talking, stopped reaching, stopped fighting, until the silence became a stranger living in the space between us. And I convinced myself she'd stopped loving me long ago. I convinced myself letting her go was the kindest thing I could do. But that Tuesday night, when her webcam flickered to life by accident, and she had no idea I could see her, I watched my ex-wife pull out our wedding album. I watched her trace my face in an old photograph with trembling fingers. And I heard her tell her sister through tears that she had never stopped loving me, not for a single day, that she filed nothing, ended nothing, because some part of her was still waiting for me to fight for her. The husband who was right there the whole time, the man who saw blueprints clearer than he ever saw his own wife's heart. But she leaves the country in 11 days. Another man is waiting for her answer. And that webcam didn't just reveal how much she still loved me, it revealed how completely I had failed to see her, how much time I'd already wasted, and how terrifyingly little I had left. So what silence had grown so loud between us that 2 people still in love couldn't hear each other anymore? What was buried in that wedding album that I'd spent 14 months too afraid to remember? And if she loved me all along, God, if she truly loved me all along, then why did I let the only woman I've ever loved slip away without saying a word? Let me tell you how we got here. 5 years into our marriage, Serena and I lost a baby. We don't talk about it. We never talked about it. That was the problem. Her name was going to be Grace. We had already chosen it, whispered it between us in the quiet dark of our bedroom one night, laughing softly, giddy with the kind of hope that makes you feel invincible. And then one February morning, the hope was just gone. No warning. No explanation that made any sense. Just silence where a heartbeat used to be. I remember standing in that hospital hallway under fluorescent lights that felt aggressively bright for a day that dark, and I didn't know what to do with my hands. I didn't know what to do with any part of myself. I was an architect. I fixed things. I built things. I made broken spaces whole again. But I was standing in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee, and I could not fix a single thing. And the woman I loved most in the world was behind a closed door, crying in a way I had never heard her cry before, and I went back to work 3 days later. I told myself she needed space. I told myself staying busy was how I coped, which was true. What I didn't tell myself, what I refused to examine, was that I went back to work because the grief in our house was so enormous and so heavy that I didn't know how to breathe inside it. So I left. Every morning I left. And every evening I came home to a wife who had spent the day drowning alone, and I would ask if she was okay, and she would say, I'm fine, because that's what we did. That's the language we had built together. Safe, surface, never too deep. She needed me to sit with her in the dark. I kept turning on the lights and leaving the room. Month after month, the distance between us grew. Not with fighting. That would have been easier. Fighting means 2 people still care enough to swing. This was quieter and more lethal than that. This was 2 people moving carefully around each other in a house full of memories, being perfectly polite, perfectly functional, and completely alone. She stopped leaving coffee on my desk in the mornings. I noticed but said nothing. I stopped sketching little drawings on her notepad. She noticed but said nothing. Cooper was born 18 months after we lost Grace, and he was loud and healthy and perfect, and we both loved him so completely that for a little while the joy of him patched over the cracks between us. But patched is not healed. Patched just means the damage is still there, waiting underneath, patient as stone. By the time Maya was old enough to notice that her parents slept on opposite sides of a bed the size of a country, Serena and I had become 2 people living parallel lives in the same house. I was pouring everything into the firm. Calloway and Banks was growing, winning awards, taking on projects across 3 states. I told myself I was building something for our future. What I was actually doing was hiding in blueprints, because blueprints never looked at me with quiet, heartbroken eyes. Then one Sunday morning 14 months ago, Serena sat across from me at the kitchen table. The same table where we used to drink coffee and argue about books and laugh until our sides hurt. And she said 7 words I will hear for the rest of my life. Nate, I think we need some space. Not anger. Not accusations. Just 7 quiet words delivered with the exhausted steadiness of a woman who had already grieved this moment privately, 100 times before finally saying it out loud. And God help me, I nodded. I nodded. Because somewhere deep in the shameful basement of my own heart, I believed I had failed her so thoroughly that agreeing to step back was the least damaging thing I could offer. I didn't fight. I didn't say, "No, Serena, please, let's fix this." I just nodded and finished my coffee and started looking for apartments the following week. She never filed papers. I never filed papers. We told people we were taking time apart. We told the children that Daddy had a new place, but he was still their daddy every single day. We told ourselves this was temporary, that space would bring clarity, that clarity would bring answers. But 14 months passed, and the only thing space brought me was the unbearable, hollow understanding of exactly what I had lost. I threw myself into work the way a drowning man throws himself at anything floating. The firm grew. My calendar was full, my apartment was clean and quiet and completely, suffocatingly empty. I dated once, a woman Jerome introduced me to, kind and intelligent and perfectly lovely, and I ended it after 3 weeks because every time she laughed I measured the sound against Serena's laugh and it didn't come close. Nothing came close. But I said nothing. I called Serena only about the children. I kept my voice professional and my face neutral in the driveway every Friday pickup. I watched her wave from the porch with that careful, polite smile that cost her something every time, and I told myself this was what she wanted. This was what she had chosen. I was so certain she had stopped loving me. I was so completely, devastatingly wrong. That Tuesday night started like every other Tuesday. I was at my desk at 9 p.m., later than I should have been, surrounded by blueprints for a waterfront development project. The kind of work that required focus I was grateful for, because focus meant I wasn't thinking. My office was quiet except for the hum of the computer fans and the distant sound of rain against the window. Portland rain, the kind that doesn't apologize. I opened the secondary monitor dashboard to find an old shared file, a collaborative cloud system Serena and I had set up years ago when we briefly worked from the same home office. We never disconnected it after the separation. It was one of those small administrative details that falls through the cracks when a life comes apart. Like the streaming service still charged to a joint account, or the grocery store loyalty card still earning points under both names. I clicked on the file directory, and that's when I saw it. A small green light in the corner of the screen, a live camera feed, active, her kitchen. She was sitting at the desk we picked out together from a little furniture store in the Pearl District. She'd spent 40 minutes debating between 2 nearly identical options, and I'd teased her about it for weeks. She was wearing an oversized sweatshirt, hair pulled up, barefoot, a glass of red wine catching the warm kitchen light. Her laptop was open and she was on a video call with Greta, her younger sister, whose voice I could hear through the audio feed, though I couldn't see her face. I should have closed it immediately. Every decent instinct I had said, "Close it, Nate. Close it right now." But I saw the way Serena's shoulders were carrying weight, that particular curve of exhaustion that I knew better than I knew my own reflection, and something in me went completely still. "You need to give Daniel an answer, Sari," Greta was saying. "He's been patient for 3 months. Daniel." The name landed in my chest like something cold. "I know," Serena said. She turned her wine glass slowly between both hands. "He's a good man, he really is. So what's stopping you?" Serena was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen was so still I could almost hear her breathing through the audio. Then she reached under the desk, slowly, the way you reach for something you've reached for many times before, and she pulled out a photo album. Our wedding album. The deep green one with the worn spine that she'd picked because it matched the color of the garden where we got married. She set it on the desk. She opened it. And in the glow of her laptop screen, with rain falling softly outside and Greta waiting quietly on the other end of the call, my wife, my separated, heartbroken, still legally, my wife pressed her fingers gently against a photograph. I knew which one without seeing it. I knew because I had the same photograph in my desk drawer at the office, turned face down because I couldn't look at it and couldn't throw it away. "Greta," she said. Her voice was steady in the way that things are steady when all the tears for a particular grief have already been spent. "We lost Grace, and instead of falling apart together, we fell apart separately. And I watched him disappear into that firm day by day, and I kept thinking, today he'll come home and really look at me. Today he'll sit with me in it." She paused. "He never did. Sari, But as I never stopped loving him, I want you to know that, not for one single day. Her finger was still resting on the photograph. I asked for space because I genuinely believed, that if I created distance, he would finally feel it. Finally fight for me. Finally look up from his blueprints long enough to see that his wife was disappearing. Her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. He nodded, Greta. I asked for space, and he just nodded, and went and found an apartment. And I've spent 14 months trying to figure out if that nod meant he was relieved. The rain against the window was the only sound in my office. Why couldn't he see it? She whispered. Why can't he see that I've loved him all along? I don't have the words for what happened inside me in that moment. I've designed structures that withstand earthquakes. I've calculated load-bearing tolerances for buildings that hold thousands of people, but nothing in my professional life or personal life had ever prepared me for the particular, catastrophic, total collapse of sitting alone in a dark office and hearing the woman I love tell her sister that she never stopped loving me, while I was busy convincing myself she was fine without me. While I was busy nodding, my hand moved to close the monitor tab. I closed it. Then I sat completely still in the dark for 4 minutes, not breathing properly, the rain getting louder, my chest feeling like a building whose foundation had just been quietly, finally, pulled from underneath it. Then I picked up my phone, stared at her name, put it down, stood up, sat back down, and then I grabbed my keys and drove to Jerome's house at 11 o'clock at night and sat at his kitchen table while his wife Claire made tea without being asked. Because Claire had always been able to read a room the way Serena could read a book. Completely, instantly, with total understanding. Jerome sat across from me. Neither of us spoke for almost a full minute. Then I said the truest thing I'd said out loud in 14 months. I think I just lost the best thing that ever happened to me, twice. And I don't know if I have enough time left to do anything about it. Jerome looked at me, steady, serious, the way a real friend looks at you when the moment is too important for comfort. How much time do you have? He asked. 11 days, I said. She leaves for Edinburgh in 11 days. The kitchen was very quiet. Then Jerome said slowly, setting down his coffee, you'd better stop sitting at my table. I want to pause here and tell you something important. Something I wish someone had told me before I lost 14 months to silence. The people you love are not mind readers. They cannot feel the weight of what you carry inside you if you never open your hands and show them. Love that lives only in your chest, unexpressed, unspoken, demonstrated through absence instead of presence, is love that the other person cannot feel. And a person who cannot feel your love will eventually, painfully, tragically, stop reaching for it. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until you've fixed yourself completely, or the timing is better, or the fear goes away. The fear never fully goes away, but the people you love, they can go away, permanently, and the silence you chose over honesty will be the loudest sound in every room you walk into, for the rest of your life. I know, because I lived it. But here's what I also know, this part I need you to stay for. Because what happened in the 11 days that followed changed everything I understood about love, about courage, and about what it truly means to fight for someone. And it started with my 9-year-old daughter saying 4 words to me that I will carry in my heart until the day I leave this earth. Are you ready? The morning after Jerome's kitchen table, I woke up at 5 a.m. Not because my alarm went off, because something inside me, something that had been asleep for 14 months, finally opened its eyes. I lay there in my apartment ceiling staring at the dark for exactly 3 minutes. Then I got up, made coffee I didn't taste, sat at my kitchen table, and did something I hadn't done since the week Serena and I lost Grace. I opened my sketchbook, not for blueprints, not for client work, not for anything billable or professional or safe. I opened it and I started drawing our house, the Craftsman on Sunnyside Road. The porch where she stood every Friday waving that careful, polite wave that cost her something each time. The kitchen window where the light always caught warm in the evenings. The garden where Cooper buried a toy car last spring and still checks on it, periodically like it might grow. I drew it from memory, which meant I drew it from love. Because those are the same thing when a place has held your whole life inside it. And sitting there in my quiet, clean, empty apartment at 5 in the morning, pencil moving across paper, rain still falling softly outside, I finally lets myself feel the full, crushing weight of what I had done. I hadn't just lost a marriage. I had abandoned a woman in her deepest grief and called it giving her space. I had mistaken her silence for indifference when it was actually exhausted love waiting to be seen. I had nodded, God, that nod, when everything inside me should have been screaming no, no, Serena, not space, never space. What I want is you. What I have always wanted is you. I sat at that table and I let it all land. Every missed morning, every late night at the firm, every Friday driveway exchange, where I kept my voice neutral and my face composed while my chest quietly came apart. I let it all hit me at once, and it hit me the way grief hits when you've been running from it for too long, all at once, like a wall. I put my pencil down, put my face in my hands, and for the first time since that hospital hallway 14 months ago, Nathaniel Calloway, the man who fixes broken spaces, who builds things that stand for generations, who has never once in his professional life walked away from a structure worth saving, finally, completely, broke down and cried, not politely, not quietly, the way a man cries when he has finally stopped lying to himself. I gave myself 20 minutes. Then I washed my face, put on my jacket, and drove to Jerome's office before he arrived. I left a document on his desk, a formal proposal, restructuring my partnership stake in Callaway and Banks, stepping back from daily operations, transitioning Jerome to lead partner, keeping myself in a consulting role on select projects, the firm I had poured 7 years of marriage into, the thing I had chosen, over and over and over again, without ever consciously meaning to, above the woman who deserved to come first. I was dismantling it, not destroying it. I wasn't being dramatic. I was simply finally rearranging what came first. Jerome found me in the parking lot an hour later, document in hand, reading glasses still on, looking at me the way he'd looked at me the night before, steady, serious, with the particular expression of a man who has been waiting a long time for this exact moment. He didn't say a word. He just held out his hand. I shook it, and something that had been locked in my chest for years quietly finally clicked open. Day 3. Wednesday dinner with Maya and Cooper. The midweek meal I'd added to our custody arrangement 2 months ago because Cooper had once asked me, so casually it almost didn't land. Daddy, do you miss us on Wednesdays? That question had rearranged something permanent in my chest. We were sitting at my kitchen table, Cooper building a mountain range out of mashed potatoes with the focused dedication of a tiny geologist. Maya eating with the precise, unhurried manner of someone who has something to say and is choosing her moment carefully. She chose it between bites of chicken. Dad, she said without looking up, did you know Mom cried last night? Everything in me went still. Maya, I got up for water, she said simply. Her door was open. She didn't know I could see her. She finally looked up at me, those dark, precise eyes, my eyes in her face. She was looking at pictures of you and her before Cooper and me. The apartment was very quiet. Cooper looked up from his mashed potato mountains. Is Mommy sad because she's leaving? I think, Maya said carefully, still watching me. Mommy is sad about something else. She set her fork down with a composure that had no bzimpsness existing in a 9-year-old. Dad, can I ask you something and you answer me for real? Not grown-up answer, real answer. Yeah, I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. Do you still love Mom? Cooper froze. Even his mashed potato mountains seemed to hold their breath. I looked at my daughter, this small, extraordinary person who had inherited her mother's ability to see straight through every wall I built around myself, and I felt the last remaining piece of my carefully constructed emotional armor fall completely away. Yes, I said, I do. I never stopped. Maya nodded slowly, not surprised, confirmed. Then Dad, she said, picking her fork back up with the quiet authority of someone closing a very important argument, stop letting things happen to you and start making them happen instead. Cooper pointed his spoon at me. What she said, I laughed. The kind of laugh that lives right next to tears and can't always tell the difference. That night, after I put them to bed, Cooper out within minutes, Maya reading with her little lamp on until I knocked and told her lights out. I sat on the edge of Cooper's bed in the dark and listened to him breathe. There is nothing in the world that sounds more like everything is worth fighting for than the sound of your child breathing peacefully in the dark. I thought about Grace, our baby girl we never got to bring home. The loss that broke Serena and me apart because we were both too shattered and too proud and too frightened to break apart together. I thought about how grief, when it isn't shared, doesn't disappear. It just becomes distance. And distance, when it isn't named, eventually becomes permanent. And I made a decision, sitting there in the dark beside my sleeping son. I was done letting things happen to me. Day 5. I went to Serena's school. Not to see her. I wasn't ready for that yet, and more importantly, she wasn't ready for that yet. I had no right to walk into her life with empty hands and a changed heart and expect her to simply receive it. That's not how trust is rebuilt. Trust is rebuilt the way a good foundation is laid, slowly, deliberately, one honest action at a time. I went to the front office and bought a copy of the student literary journal that Serena ran every year. The receptionist, a cheerful woman named Deb, who had clearly been working there since the building was constructed, charged me $2 and told me it was the best one yet. I read it that evening at my kitchen table. There was a poem near the back, no author name, just staff contributor. But I knew her voice the way I knew the sound of rain on our old craftsman roof. I had known that voice for 11 years. I would know it anywhere. The poem was about a lighthouse keeper who tended the light faithfully, every single night, for years, keeping ships safe, keeping the darkness back, keeping watch, and a sailor who passed by that lighthouse every night on his way to somewhere else, grateful for the light, comforted by its constancy, but never once stopping to ask who was keeping it burning. Until one night the light went dark, and by the time the sailor turned his ship around, the shore was very far away. I read it 3 times. Then I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. She had been the lighthouse. Every single morning coffee left on my desk. Every year spent quietly rereading my college sketchbook on my birthday. Every candle lit, every dinner made, every silent, faithful act of love offered in the language I never learned to receive. And I had been the sailor, grateful for the warmth, comforted by her constancy. Sailing past her every single night toward something that in the end meant nothing close to what I was leaving behind. Day 6. I made 2 phone calls that changed the course of everything. The first was to an architectural firm in Edinburgh, Scotland, Hargreaves and Muir, one of the most respected practices in the UK. A firm I had twice been approached by for collaborative projects and twice politely declined because I couldn't imagine leaving Portland. I called their senior partner, a man named Stuart Hargreaves, 71 years old, and apparently delighted to hear from me at what must have been a very early Edinburgh morning. I told him I was interested in their open residential residency position. The one also offered me 18 months ago that I'd turned down without a second thought. There was a pause on the line. Then Stuart Hargreaves laughed, warm, genuine, slightly astonished. "Calloway," he said, "I was beginning to think you were married to Portland." "I was," I said. "I'm working on changing that." The second call was harder. I called my mother, Eleanor Calloway, 64, sharp and warm and carrying the particular wisdom of a woman who married young, loved deeply, and lost my father to a heart attack at 57, a man who also worked too hard and said too little, and left behind a wife who had loved him completely and a son who inherited all his worst habits without realizing it until it was almost too late. She answered on the second ring. She always answers on the second ring. "Nathaniel, just my name." But in her voice it contained everything. The worried months, the careful questions she hadn't pushed, the patience of a mother who knew her son well enough to know he had to arrive at his own truth in his own time. "Mom," I said, "I think I've been living like Dad." Silence on the line, then a long, slow exhale. "I know, baby," she said softly. "I've been waiting for you to see it." "I don't want to lose her," I said, and my voice broke on the last word, cleanly, completely, without apology. "I don't want to be the man who had everything and only understood it when it was walking out the door." My mother was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady and warm and carried the weight of 64 years of real, hard-earned wisdom. "Your father," she said, "was a good man who loved me more than he ever knew how to say, and I watched him go to his grave with words still locked in his chest, words I needed, words that would have changed so many of our years together." She paused. "Don't you do that, Nathaniel. Don't you dare do that." "I won't," I said. "Then go," she said simply. "Go and say the thing, whatever it costs. Say it." Day 8. I need to tell you about Daniel Frost, because this part matters, and I refuse to tell this story dishonest. Daniel Frost was 40 years old, a pediatric doctor at Oregon Health and Science University. And by every account I could gather from Jerome, who knew someone, the way Jerome always does, he was a genuinely uncomplicatedly good man, patient, kind. The kind of steady presence that makes complete and rational sense for a woman rebuilding her life after a painful separation. He had been quietly, respectfully pursuing Serena for 3 months. He hadn't pushed, hadn't pressured. He had simply made himself consistently, gently available and told her once. Jerome heard this secondhand from Claire, who heard it from Greta. "I know part of you lives somewhere I can't reach. I'm willing to wait." That sentence sat in my stomach like a stone, because it told me 2 things simultaneously. First, that Daniel Frost was a better man than most. Second, that Serena hadn't said yes to him. In 3 months, she hadn't said yes. Because there was no room. There was no room because I was still in it. 14 months of silence and distance and careful driveway exchanges, and I was still completely occupying her heart. I didn't feel triumphant about that. I felt the full, humbling, sobering weight of what that meant, that this woman had carried love for me through every difficult month, through her grief and her loneliness, and her quiet lighthouse keeper faithfulness, and I had given her nothing in return except a nod and an apartment lease. She deserved better than that. She deserved someone who would finally, completely show up. I drove to Daniel Frost's office that afternoon. I didn't have a plan. I want to be honest about that. I drove there on instinct, on the same impulse that makes you reach for something before your mind has fully caught up with your heart. He met me in the lobby. Tall, calm, measured, the kind of man who has delivered difficult news to frightened parents and learned to carry hard moments with grace. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "You're Nate, not a question." "Yeah," I said. He nodded slowly, looked at the floor briefly, then back at me. "She talks about her kids a lot," he said. "And there's always this moment, just a second, where her face does something she does, to notice it doing." He paused. "I used to think it was about the separation, but it's not about the separation, is it?" It wasn't a question either. "No," I said quietly, "it's not." Daniel Frost looked at me for a long moment with the dignified, slightly pained expression of a good man, accepting a truth he'd probably already known for longer than he'd admitted to himself. Then he held out his hand. "Take care of her," he said. "She's remarkable." "I know," I said. "I should have shown her that I knew it a long time ago." We shook hands. He went back to his patients. I stood in that lobby for a moment, holding the full weight of his grace. The grace of a man's stepping aside not because he was defeated, but because he was decent. I have never forgotten that handshake. I hope he found someone extraordinary. A man like that deserves to. Day 9. I called Greta, Serena's younger sister. The one who had been on the other end of that video call. The one who heard everything Serena said while I sat in the dark of my office, with my hand frozen over the mouse. She picked up warily. "Nate, Greta, I need to tell you something and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." A pause. "Okay." The network was still connected. The shared cloud system from the house. Her camera was on. Dead silence. "Greta," I heard what she said. More silence then. "How much did you hear?" "All of it." The longest pause of the entire phone call. Then Greta said, in a voice that was equal parts stunned and something that sounded almost like relief, "Nate Calloway, what are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to tell her the truth," I said. "Everything. The webcam, the restructured partnership, Edinburgh, all of it. But I need to know one thing first." "What? Is she happy? Not with me? Not about us? Just, is she okay? Is she genuinely at peace with leaving?" Greta was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer. "She's doing what she always does, Nate. She's being brave on the outside and genuinely, lovingly lived in." I stood on the other side of the kitchen table, the table where 14 months ago she'd said 7 words that changed everything, and I looked at the woman I had loved for 11 years and I finally, completely, opened my hands. I told her about the network, the shared cloud system, the camera. I watched her face change, the color rising, the mug going carefully down onto the counter, her arms crossing not in anger, but in the instinctive self-protection of someone who has just realized they were seen when they believed they were invisible. "Nate, I heard everything," I said, "and I know how that sounds, I know, but I need you to hear what it did to me." She was very still. "I sat in that office in the dark," I said, "and I heard you say you never stopped loving me. And I want you to know, Serena, I want you to know, that I have never, not for a single day, stopped loving you either. Not when I found that apartment, not through 14 months of driveway exchanges, not once." Her jaw tightened. Her eyes were bright. "Then why," she said, and her voice was very quiet and very steady and very devastating, "did you nod?" And there it was. The question that deserved the truest answer I had. "Because I thought you were done," says it. "Because I had spent years failing you in every quiet, invisible way a man can fail the person he loves. And when you asked for space, I thought it meant you had finally, mercifully, given yourself permission to be done with me. And I loved you enough to not make it harder." I paused. "I was wrong. I was so wrong, Serena. I mistook your exhaustion for indifference. I mistook your silence for an answer, when it was actually a question you'd been asking me for years." A tear escaped. Just one. She didn't wipe it. "You should have fought," she whispered. "I know," I said. "I know. And I can't give you those 14 months back. I can't undo the nod. I can't rebuild what Grace's loss took from us, from both of us, the way it should have been rebuilt together instead of separately. My voice held barely. But I am standing in this kitchen telling you that I have restructured my life, not for you to see it, because it was what I owed myself, my kids, and the man I should have been a long time ago. The partnership is restructured. Jerome leads the firm. I've applied for a residency position at Hargreaves and Muir in Edinburgh. She stared at me. Edinburgh, she said. Edinburgh, I confirmed. I'm not asking you to cancel your fellowship. I'm not asking you to come back to a life that didn't work. I'm asking you to let me come into your world this time. Let me be in the same city. Let me prove, not with words, Serena. I know words are cheap from me, but with every single day, that I finally understand what it means to show up. The kitchen was completely silent. Outside, Portland rain fell soft and steady against the window. She looked at me for a long time. I stood there and let her look. Didn't rush it. Didn't fill the silence. Didn't retreat. Just stood there, with everything I had finally learned about love laid completely open between us. Then she said very softly, "What took you so long?" And I said the only honest answer I had. I was afraid, and I was stupid, and I am so sorry, Serena, for every morning I left, for every night I came home late, for the candles you blew out alone, for the dinner you made that I never came home for Grace, my voice broke fully on her name, for Grace most of all. I should have sat with you in that. I should never have left you alone in that. The tear that had been waiting finally fell, then another. She put her hand over her mouth, and then, slowly, the way dawn arrives, not all at once but undeniably, she crossed the kitchen, and Serena Calloway walked into my arms. I held her the way I should have held her 1,000 times, tightly, without an exit strategy, without one eye on the clock or one part of my mind already at the office. I held her like a man who has finally, at great cost, learned the only thing that ever actually mattered. She cried quietly against my shoulder. I held on. After a long time, she pulled back just enough to look at me. Her eyes were red. Her face was completely, beautifully unguarded. "Edinburgh is cold," she said. "I know," I said, "and rainy. I'm from Portland," I said. "I'll manage." Something moved through her expression, grief and relief, and 11 years of love finding its way back to the surface after too long underwater. Then she laughed, soft and broken and real. The laugh that made strangers turn around in restaurants. The laugh I had been measuring everything else against for 14 months without admitting it. I want to stop here and speak directly to you, because this story isn't just mine. If you are in a relationship right now, marriage, partnership, the person you come home to, and there is distance between you that you've been calling space when what it actually is fear, hear me. The distance doesn't heal itself. Silence doesn't soften with time. The person on the other side of that quiet is not a mind reader. They cannot feel what you won't say. They cannot stay forever in a love that never speaks their name. And the tragedy isn't always dramatic. It isn't always a fight or a betrayal or a single terrible moment. Sometimes the tragedy is just Tuesday after Tuesday of almost saying the thing and choosing not to, of almost reaching and pulling back, of almost fighting and deciding it's easier not to, until one day you look up and the person is gone. Sometimes they're gone physically. Sometimes they're still in this house but completely, heartbreakingly unreachable. Don't let that be your story. Say the thing, make the call, cross the kitchen. Because some mistakes, if you are brave enough, honest enough, and fast enough, do get a second chance, and some don't. And the only way to know which kind you're standing in front of is to stop waiting and find out. We didn't fix everything that night in the kitchen. Real love doesn't work that way, and I won't pretend it does. There were more conversations, hard ones, tears that had nothing to do with relief. Grief for Grace that we finally, 14 months late, sat in together at that kitchen table with cold tea and the rain outside, saying her name out loud to each other for the first time since the hospital. That alone, just saying her name, broke something open in both of us that had needed breaking for a very long time. I have found out 3 days later. She sat across from me at Wednesday dinner, listened to me explain that things were going to be different, that I was coming to Edinburgh, that we were going to take this slowly and honestly, and without promises we couldn't keep. And when I finished, she looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once, satisfied. "Precise, I knew you'd figure it out," she said, and went back to her dinner. Cooper cried. Not from sadness. From the particular overwhelming relief of a 6-year-old whose whole world suddenly made sense again. He climbed into my lap at the table and held on with both arms and said, muffled against my jacket, "Does this mean we eat dinner together now?" "Yeah, Coop," I said, holding him tight. "It means we eat dinner together. 6 weeks later, I stood in Edinburgh. Cold, yes. Rainy, absolutely. Beautiful in the way that places are beautiful when they hold something you love inside them. Serena met me at the door of the small flat she'd rented near the university, a ground floor place with a bay window, and potted plants she'd already arranged on the sill because she had been in the city for 3 weeks, and she was incapable of living somewhere without making it warm. She was wearing her yellow rain jacket, the same color as the one she'd been wearing in that bookstore on Burnside Street on a rainy Thursday in October 11 years ago when I dripped on the hardwood floor and pretended to be interested in books I already owned. I stopped on the doorstep. She raised an eyebrow. Are you going to stand there, or are you going to come in? I paused. You're wearing the yellow jacket. She looked down at it, then back at me, and something warm and knowing moved through her expression. The recognition of a woman who understands that the man standing on her doorstep remembers everything, always has, and is only now learning to say so. I've always had the yellow jacket, Nate, she said softly. I know, I said. I should have told you sooner how much I loved it. She smiled, fully, without it costing her anything, and I walked through the door. That evening, after dinner, after the dishes, after Cooper's video call from Portland, where he held up a new drawing, 4 people in front of a house, all holding hands, labeled carefully in 6-year-old handwriting, Our Family Edinburgh, Serena put on a record, vinyl old. The one I'd bought on our first date from a little shop on Hawthorne Boulevard, Etta James, at last. It filled the small Edinburgh flat with warmth, real warmth, the kind that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the people. Inside the room, Serena stood in the middle of the kitchen and held out her hand. I took it. We didn't dance well, we never had, but we danced the way we used to dance in the Craftsman kitchen on Sunday mornings when we thought we had all the time in the world. Slowly, close, with no technique and no performance and nothing but the uncomplicated, extraordinary joy of being exactly where you are supposed to be. At last, Etta sang. I rested my chin on top of her head. She rested her hand against my chest, right over the place where, for 14 months, I'd carried her name without saying it. And in a small flat in Edinburgh, Scotland, with rain on the windows and a vinyl record playing, and the warmth of a love that had survived silence and grief and distance, and 14 months of almost, Nathaniel and Serena Calloway finally completely came home. Not to a place. To each other, which is where home had always been. Let me leave you with this. Life will hand you moments, quiet, ordinary, unremarkable-looking moments, that are actually everything. A Tuesday evening. A webcam left on by accident. A poem with no name. A 9-year-old girl who sees straight through every wall her father built. Pay attention to those moments. Because the life you want, the love you want, is not waiting for you in some dramatic future version of yourself. It is right here, right now, in the person across the table, in the conversation you've been postponing, in the word you've been holding back because the timing never felt perfect. The timing will never be perfect. Say it anyway. Fight for it anyway. Cross the kitchen anyway. Because the most important thing I have ever built in my life was not a single structure of glass and steel and engineered stone. It was the courage to finally, after everything, tell the woman I loved that I had loved her all along, and mean it and show it, every single day. That's the only blueprint that ever truly mattered. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone, or something you've been meaning to say, share it. Leave a comment. Tell the person. You never know who needs to hear it today. And if you've been the lighthouse in someone's life, faithfully keeping the light on, hoping they'll finally turn the ship around, I see you. Your love is not invisible. It is not wasted. Keep the light on. But also, and I say this gently, make sure they know it's burning.